There is a building in Hangzhou, China, and it was supposed to be something else entirely. That is where this story begins, not with a housing block, but with a dream that failed in the most spectacular way possible and left behind something the world had never quite seen before. Regent International. A name that still carries the ghost of its original ambition. A six-star hotel, designed by the same architect who gave Singapore's Marina Bay Sands its iconic silhouette, Alicia Liu, commissioned to build the kind of place where marble lobbies swallow sound and the towels cost more than a month's rent. The plans called for something worthy of Hangzhou's emerging Qianjiang Century City District, a landmark, a symbol of arrival. And then the money ran out of story, before the story ran out of building. What the developers inherited was a colossal, curving-shaped tower, 208 meters tall. 39 floors of empty ambition rising above a district that locals still called, with a certain earned resignation, the middle of nowhere. A six-star hotel with nowhere near enough wealthy guests to fill it. So they made a decision that would quietly rewrite the rules of urban density. Whether they intended to or not, they began to divide. Every floor, originally laid out in generous hotel suites, was carved into smaller and smaller compartments. The loft units originally designed at between 74 and 222 square meters, with ceiling heights approaching 6 meters. The kind of proportions that make a room feel like breathing were split, first into smaller apartments, then smaller still. Some 90 square meter units were divided into at least 6 individual rooms, larger ones into 8. By the time the subdivision was complete, one building held roughly 11,250 individual living units, stacked inside a single address beneath a single roof. And people came. They came in numbers that strained the mathematics of what a building is supposed to hold. If you want to watch the quiet transformation of the world's great cities, before the mainstream media decides to cover it, subscribe. Empire Falls documents the patterns that most people only recognize once they have already passed. At its peak, Regent International housed somewhere between 20,000 and 30,000 people, figures that remain contested because no government on Earth wanted to officially confirm that this many human beings were living inside one building. Chinese police at the local station reported that the building once housed nearly 20,000 people. A 2023 article from Hangzhou Network Media placed the peak number above 30,000 during the shared housing frenzy. Snopes, which investigated the viral claims, concluded that the figure of 30,000 likely reflected maximum design capacity rather than verified daily occupancy. The real number sits somewhere in the uncomfortable space between those figures, large enough to dwarf most towns in rural America or rural England, and concentrated inside a single postcode. For context, the town of Whittier, Alaska, famously houses nearly its entire population in one building. Regent International makes Whittier look like a garden shed. The building became, in ways its developers almost certainly never planned, a genuine urban machine. Not architecture in the traditional sense. Something closer to infrastructure, a living system that had to solve, on its own, problems that cities normally solve across entire boroughs and decades. Water, for one. You cannot simply pump water to the top of a 208-meter tower and let gravity distribute it. The pressure physics alone would destroy standard plumbing. Engineers call the resulting destruction a water hammer, and residents would call it something unprintable. The solution was to zone the building vertically, with large storage tanks and pressure reduction stations built into the structure every 20 floors, managing 2 entirely separate water circuits simultaneously. Purified drinking water for cooking in taps, and a second system, fed by recycled rainwater and gray water, used exclusively for toilet flushing. Tens of thousands of people. Not a drop of potable water wasted on a toilet. The elevators were split too, one group serving floors 1 through 20, a second group skipping the ground floor entirely and running express to floors 21 through 39, so that peak hour rush never became a paralysis. Solar panels on the roof fed the common areas. The waste disposal ran through dedicated floor-level collection rooms, with service elevator teams clearing the building's arteries before the smell could settle into the corridors. This was not a building. It was a small city, wearing the skin of a building. And the city inside it had an economy. After the G20 summit of 2016 anchored Hangzhou at the center of China's live-streaming commerce revolution, Regent International became something its corridors had not been designed for: a vertical production studio. Influencers, streamers, small team content operations, they flooded in, drawn by rents that, even in a building of this density and ambition, remained startlingly cheap for the location. Units without windows, buried in the building's interior, no natural light, no sky, no weather, rented for the equivalent of $200 to $300 per month. Higher floors with windows and, on the upper levels, balconies and views of the Qiantang River reached $500 to $550. At its peak, property management data showed that roughly 25% of the entire building was occupied by commercial operators, the majority of them live streaming related. One analysis suggested the digital commerce generated inside this single tower rivaled the economic output of an entire rural county. Ring light after ring light, stacked floor by floor, producing content for an economy that had no physical address beyond this one. What we have traced here, the failed luxury hotel, the subdivision into 11,250 units, the tens of thousands who packed in, the vertical economy of streamers and young migrants drifting to Hangzhou in search of a foothold, these are not separate curiosities. They are symptoms of the same pressure that is reshaping every major city on Earth right now. Land running out, housing unaffordable, the distance between ambition and reality growing wider by the year. I assembled the early warning signals, the geography of where the next decade will actually be lived, and the patterns history has rehearsed before into a guide called When Everything Falls. You will find the link in the description or just scan the code that is on screen right now. But stay here, because the final chapter of this building story is the one nobody who shared the drone footage thought to ask about. The crackdown came in 2021. Hangzhou's Shaoshan district government, preparing for the 19th Asian Games and sensitive to the building's reputation, formed a task force. What followed was a large-scale investigation, building scans, phone registration sweeps, the dismantling of thousands of illegally subdivided partitions. The task force identified over 10,000 registered permanent residents, a figure that represented only the sanctioned occupants. 3 people were detained for prostitution-related offenses. Landlords and subletters received fines. Social media, which had spent years amplifying Regent International as a viral curiosity, pivoted instantly to amplifying it as a den of vice and disorder. The building that had made Hangzhou famous on TikTok and Reddit became, in the space of a few months, the building that Chinese internet users were warned about. The Regent has been seriously stigmatized, a local real estate operator told Sixth Tone. You could even say demonized. The irony is precise and painful. The same density that made Regent International extraordinary, the same compression of lives and economies and ambitions into a single address, was the density that made it ungovernable by the standards of a state that does not tolerate ungovernable spaces. The facial recognition gates were installed in the lobby. A surveillance system of 603 high-definition cameras, 16 smart access gates, and 1,865 smoke detectors was wired into Hangzhou's City Brain 3 initiative, feeding data directly to the local police station. The building became, in the language of urban governance, a demonstration zone, which is a bureaucratic way of saying a place under observation. The vertical city had become a vertical panopticon. Today, Regent International houses somewhere in the range of 8,000 to 10,000 residents, a population that still dwarfs most small towns, but represents perhaps a third of its peak human density. Real estate agents still walk prospective tenants through the marble lobby, reminding them of what this place used to mean. In its prime, this place wowed the entire city, one agent was quoted saying. The hallways are still lined with marble. The food courts still open. The elevators still divide themselves between the lower and upper halves of a building that once held the noise of a continent's ambitions. And investors are waiting, some of them quietly, some of them not so quietly, for the next wave AI, advanced manufacturing, whatever Hangzhou's next economic chapter turns out to be to fill the floors again. But the questions the building asks do not depend on whether the next wave arrives. They are structural. They are the questions that every city on Earth is now being forced to confront. Because Regent International is not an anomaly. It is an early draft. The global housing crisis has been accelerating for 2 decades, not just in China, but in London, in Sydney, in San Francisco, in every city where land values have outrun wages and the gap between what people can afford and what cities actually contain has become a chasm rather than a margin. Regent International answered that chasm in the most direct way imaginable. Stack everything, compress everything, charge by the floor, and let the market sort itself by elevation. The windowless rooms on the lower floors, the riverview lofts at the top, the inequality that exists in every city, reproduced not across neighborhoods, not across zip codes or postcodes, but across floors of a single building. You want a better neighborhood? It is 11 floors up and $150 more per month. You cannot move to a better part of town. You can only afford a different altitude. This is the part that the viral drone footage never lingered on. The spectacle is the building from the outside, the sheer scale of the S-curve rising above the Kuantang River, the glass and concrete repeating into a kind of architectural hypnosis. But the story is what the building decided about human life, mostly by accident. It decided that efficiency and aspiration can coexist in the same address if you are willing to sort them vertically. It decided that self-sufficiency, when enclosed inside a single structure, can look like liberation or imprisonment, depending entirely on which floor you drew. It decided, without ever intending to, that the future of housing in a world running out of affordable ground might look less like a neighborhood and more like this one door from the elevator, one price per floor, one building holding the entire spectrum of a city's economic life, from the lobby to the roof. Empires do not announce their restructuring. They find it already underway. Regent International is not a cautionary tale, and it is not a blueprint. It is something rarer and more disquieting than either. It is a mirror. What Hangzhou built on the banks of the Qiantang River, under budget pressure and market desperation, is a compressed image of what every overcrowded, overpriced, land-starved city on Earth is quietly moving toward. Not all at once. Not with a single dramatic moment. In the way that all real change happens, floor by floor, door by door, one subdivision at a time, until the building you thought you were living in has become something nobody originally designed. The question is not whether cities will go there. The question is how far up you can afford to live